I love personal finance and it's what I do. But if I was really forced to just teach people one thing, I'd tell them to say, in our system, nothing's free and everything's connected. Find out how to use that and be a part of that system.
Yeah.
I say, take a part of capitalism or it'll take a part of you.
Welcome to Housing Matters, the podcast that covers everything real estate, from buying your first home to building your investment portfolio. Hosted by me, Matt Pouliot, Pouliot Real Estate. Each episode brings expert insights, smart strategies, and real talk on housing and affordability. If it's about real estate, it matters here. Today on Housing Matters, I'm thrilled to have joining us Steve Kautz. Steve is an accredited financial counselor and has worked on financial literacy efforts in Maine since 2004. He joined FAME, the Finance Authority of Maine, in 2023 as a financial education programs specialist. And Steve studied economics at Southern Connecticut State University, has an MBA from the University of Hartford's Executive MBA program, and he served in the United States Peace Corps in what was then the Czech Republic from 1995 to 1997. Steve has taught in a number of different places over the years and does now outreach events, including visiting classrooms, presenting, tabling at conferences, and contributing to or creating web content such as FAME's personal finance blog called Money Matters for Maine. Steve lived abroad for about 10 years total between the Czech Republic and Spain, and now lives in Portland with his wife, Raquel, and 13-year-old son, Oliver. Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's really fun to do something like this.
Yeah, and you've got the right haircut for the program. I love it. You've been involved in financial literacy and education in Maine for years now, and you're currently serving as the program specialist at the Finance Authority of Maine for financial education. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how it is really that you came to focus on personal finance and your role at FAME, what that involves?
Sure. Personal finance as an educator has been a journey for me. I studied economics. I started out in business early in my career, but quickly found myself with a lot of credit cards, a lot of debt, and a job I didn't like. And the short version is that I realized I wanted to change paths. I wanted to become an educator, and that didn't work with having debt and credit cards and all of that. So through luck, education, some influential voices, books, and experiences, I said, I can change my path when it comes to money, and worked myself into a better situation financially, which just meant getting my head above water and then a little higher. And then along the way said, I would like to teach this and as I become a teacher. And I entered the world of teaching. When I served in the Peace Corps, I was teaching English and marketing and economics. When I came back to the U.S. and I started teaching, I got to teach economics at a school in Virginia. And I put personal finance into the curriculum. And then in Maine, in Portland, I started a personal finance program with an elective and then clubs and so on, and got involved with a Maine Jumpstart Coalition for personal finance that supports teachers in Maine who are teaching personal finance. And, everything from speaking at events to planning events and curriculum for all the teachers in Maine. And then I met FAME along the way, the connections between FAME as a sponsor of Jumpstart. And when I was living in Spain, I still did work for Maine Jumpstart remotely. And an opportunity came up back at FAME to work in financial education statewide. And with the family made the decision to come back to Maine and took that position, and it's perfect for me. So
in a lot of ways, you've become an ambassador for financial literacy, personal finance, maybe for FAME, the Finance Authority of Maine, going around sharing best practices.
They could change my title to ambassador. I like to think of that. I like to think of in every aspect of my work and my life, I think people know that I'm a personal finance guy, and I believe in it, and I believe in it from the educational point of view, from trying to work with the youngest and people of all ages, wherever they are, to educate, to help them find a better life in the sense of how the personal finance, financial wellness connects to all of these things in our life.
Yeah, because we live in a system that has certain rules, and some people know how to play by those rules and some people don't. I have thought for a lot of times that it's difficult to advance financial literacy education, oftentimes because the educators themselves don't feel they have a good financial foundation, and they maybe feel like not equipped to go in front of a student group and say, this is what you should be doing with your finances. In some ways, it can pull in, for lack of a better way of describing this, maybe a feeling of being hypocritical. If they're up in front of the group saying, you should put aside 10% of your income into a high yield savings account,
That's right.
and they themselves are not doing that, maybe they can't financially, or they're choosing not to.
Yeah.
And they're trying to educate. It's not like educating someone on 1 + 1 is 2. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
You're educating them on putting your money in a high yield savings account might be a good return, but are there other things? Is that the best thing? And then there's a lot of human behavior involved in financial literacy education, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The information nowadays, especially on credit score or interest calculators, it's at our fingertips. And it's just easy to get. Why don't we implement that then? If we all can see the path toward whatever our version of financial wellness is, well, that's because it's an emotional thing. Buying is an emotional thing. Spending is an emotional thing. Influence nowadays from social media. In the old days, it was keeping up with the Joneses. Nowadays, it's keeping up with social media. The psychological aspect of why is fascinating to me. I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time with Dr. Sarah Newcomb, who went to the University of Maine, and she specializes in this, and it fascinates me. Her books fascinate me to talk about the reasons why we don't make better decisions despite
What are some of
the
those? I'm
information.
curious.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that stand out, but one of the things that she said that has always really stood out to me, and I'm still living this, real sidetrack about teaching this. That's why Maine Jumpstart is trying to support educators, because many times they're a social studies teacher who's been asked to teach personal finance and they feel ill-equipped. So we try to give them what they need to teach the subject. And maybe if they're only a chapter ahead in the book of the students. For many years when I was teaching this, I was barely ahead because I was still getting my own stuff in order.
Sure.
I'd like to think I'm a few chapters ahead now, but I'm still a long way from the end of the book when it comes to exercising my best practices personally, right? But the psychological things, one of the big ones is human beings are not wired to think about the future. We're wired for survival. This is deep down. And very few of us, whether it's decisions we make about money or other decisions we make in life, rarely are we able to go, how's this going to impact me down the road if I hang out with this person or if I make this money decision? We're just not wired that way.
It's interesting you mention this because I've had the blessing of one of my best friends as a financial advisor. So when I started doing well in real estate and earning more than what I needed to pay my bills, he was the first to say, you should really set aside this chunk of money into this, vehicle here in the market at the time. And I remember the first time I did this, the amount of money that I set aside was a lot of money. It was $40,000, which for me was more than I made in any year working at Hammond Lumber Company. And I was like, how am I going to set aside? Why am I doing this? You know what I mean? Why am I not going to buy something like a sports car or
Something
a boat
for now.
or something fun, right?
Yeah.
For now. Now it's been like 10 years since that particular event, and there's been others since. And I have times where I sit down and I do my personal financial statement, and I'm like, wow, I'm really thankful that Jack is his name. Jack told me to do this, over 10 years ago now, because now that's worth much more than 40. And I don't have like a vehicle that's depreciated in value and is essentially worthless during that same period of time.
Yeah.
But at the time, when you're in the moment, it's like, holy smokes, this is nuts. And I've had people say to me, like, why is it that you still drive the same pickup truck that's paid for? And it's like, because I'm broke. I'm not broke, but I put my money into investments first, like paying for the future before buying the things now if the thing works now.
Yeah.
And this is like really difficult to put your own restraints on yourself in an environment where everybody's telling you it's okay to do, it's okay to do. And I think that is such a huge part of financial literacy, in addition to like, what is a high yield savings account? What is a 401k? What, these are elements of learning the rules, but then you have to also decide whether you're going to play by those rules or not.
100%. And when I teach, specifically when I'm with students, when I taught high school, or now I do a college course, or if I'm with a group of adults, whatever, I think it's very important to get conversations going. So we can talk about why we make certain decisions, and we can dig into our own psychology and talk about why I might, as an educator, say, pay your future self. So I'll joke in a classroom and try to make it fun, even with middle schoolers, and say, oh, I got a phone call. It's you from 30 years. And telling you, and the kids laugh. Humor sets memory. And that, so things like that are really important, to just acknowledge that it's hard, acknowledge that we have these pressures for now. There's, society and the wonderful marketing machine in the United States, right, that is capitalism, tells us we need to have this. And it's around all the time. It's very hard to then take that away from yourself if you either have the money, in the case that you described, or it's way too easy to borrow the money in the form of credit cards. And, I've lived abroad and I've taught students from dozens of countries. We have the most complicated system, but we also have the most opportunity. And part of that's the ease and availability of credit. So, these decisions get even harder because it's so easy to get the thing now. And it's also hard for young people, for example, to look at older people and say, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say. Well, there's a point where I wasn't that old, and I made that decision, and I know a lot of other people who made that decision when they were your age, and they live a lot more comfortably than I do, because of some certain habits that have proven to work for 100 years or more, or 1,000 years, right? But the psychology part is critical, and it plays into, I think, how we teach it and how effective it can be. So again, I like to try to think of everything as a conversation based on real experiences, so we can say, and we can touch on the shame aspect, right? Because sometimes people might not take advantage of having a free class or something because they don't want other people to think, hey, I'm not good with my money. We've all been there.
Right.
And what's going to make the difference now is, what do you do today, right? And so educating on filling in those blanks of, compound interest and credit score, all the technical pieces, but then constantly having these real conversations about the psychological piece is critical.
Well, I've talked about this before, but I view there's kind of like this dirty secret, in my opinion, that people don't want to talk about as it relates to capitalism, which is the foundation of our economic system in the United States. We could have a long program on the pros and cons of that, but that's what's here. And it's not likely to change anytime soon. But that system by its nature, in my opinion, and I think what people are not talking about frequently enough, is the asymmetry of that system, and by which it does better when less people know how it works for the people that understand how it works, right? And we're starting to see a growing chasm between the people that understand how it works and the people that don't, because in the last decades, maybe since we left the gold standard and moved more toward a credit-based consumer economy, we've shifted away from people understanding and having basically the same fundamental understanding of the way the market works and how and what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Namely, go to my 9-to-5 job, collect my check, a certain amount goes into 401k, my house gets paid down to zero, I've built a decent nest egg for myself. That's largely not accessible for many. And for those for whom it is accessible, it's even more complicated now with different layers that we've added on. And so to me, it seems that what you're trying to do, like with your blog, Money Matters for Maine blog, is bring more education to the forefront so that we can start breaking down some of that asymmetry and that people better understand the rules of the game, which are accessible to everybody, but don't feel that way because they don't have the tools from an education perspective is definitely one area where we can get everyone on the same page. The next area, what we just talked about briefly, is the whole psychological side of it, which is a tougher nut to crack.
Yeah.
Ultimately, just because it's not a good idea to drive 100 miles an hour down the road doesn't mean that someone's not going to do it.
Right.
So is this part of what your work is now, is trying to break down the barriers around educating people?
Yes. I think that, and part of my work and part of FAME's, the way it connects to FAME's mission is to help Mainers with their economic well-being. And, we believe that education is a critical part of that for all the reasons you said. And when I think about the understanding of our system, that is so true. I mean, I was in economics first, and I love economics. That's sort of my nerd place to go is economics. And people don't understand economics very well. They don't understand the nature of capitalism, which I agree with you, we basically are. And like George Soros said, it's the best ism we have for now. Yeah. Maybe someday we'll have something else, but this is what we have. Better to learn to function within it than to hope for something else. Better to learn what spend less than you make means nowadays, right? Something our grandparents told us. But when credit cards became easy to get, when all of this other kind of stuff, when the rules were changing around us, the education didn't keep up.
So what I'm seeing happening a little bit, and maybe gives me a little bit of hope, is when the companies whose mission it is to return profit to their shareholders start to say, how do we use our infrastructure and the resources that we have, particularly around AI and where that's going, to more force this behavior? Because, if you read a book like Tiny Habits, right, it talks about changing habits and starting real small, right? Like if you want to start working out at the gym, maybe for the first week, just drive to the gym, walk inside, look around, get a glass of water and leave. Don't even work out. Just get your brain accustomed to going to the gym, because we're really largely, our behavior is changed based on prompts, not as much as we'd like to think our own internal motivation. Like, I'm going to white knuckle it and do it. Usually that doesn't stay for the long term. But where I'm coming with this is groups like Robinhood Financial as an example, right? They got a lot of flack during COVID because they basically shut the market off on one stock, right? Because it was a crazy once-in-a-life event with GameStop, and they got a lot of flack for that. But I was recently listening to a podcast with their CEO. Now it's 6 years almost removed from that. And he's talking about how they have a new credit card. And I'm like, oh, great, just what we need, another credit card. But with that credit card, the 3% you get on all categories. So it's not like, is this a 1% or a 2% or a 5%? You just get 3% back. But they put the 3% into a Robinhood account. Obviously, it's self-serving for them as an organization to get more people investing on the platform. But they're forcing people to do with their return what they might or maybe should be doing. If we were looking at it through the lens of a financial literacy class, what's the best thing to do with the money that's returned to you? Invest it in the market to let it compound and grow. They're forcing that behavior to happen vis-a-vis a natural process of somebody going getting gas.
Yeah.
Boom, they're 3%. Now it's dumped into their Robinhood account. Maybe that was $1.72 on that transaction. But 10 years from now, that's worth $27.
Yeah. There are a lot of companies, a lot of organizations doing really innovative things with technology like that, apps or situations where you can take the change from $1 round up and put it into an investment account. Really, really cool ways to make it easier to make better decisions and start good habits. One of the things I say in all my presentations is to break the monthly payment mentality where everything is $6.99 a month.
Right.
Cancel some of those things, pay them to yourself instead.
Yeah.
Start a monthly payment mentality of saving. So I'm going to cancel, and this is no offense to companies who are trying to sell.
Sure.
They're in the business of making a profit.
Sure.
That's how capitalism works. There's ways to take part in that, which you've alluded to with the stock market and everything. But as a consumer and as a person, you need to look out for your own capitalism. So that might mean not having a streaming service or going to this restaurant every week or something, redirecting that money automatically into a savings account, an investment, an education savings account for your future or your children's future or whatever.
It's like when you're on the airplane, they say put your oxygen mask on first.
Right. And our system, if I could teach one lesson, like I love personal finance and it's what I do, but if I was really forced to just teach people one thing, I'd tell them to say, in our system, nothing's free and everything's connected. Find out how to use that and be a part of that system.
Yeah.
I say, take a part of capitalism or it'll take a part of you.
Yeah. That's a good one.
That's my phrase.
Steve Kautz.
Yeah, that's my. I think it is anyway.
Yeah, I love it.
And I specifically relate that usually to the stock market, right? As to why, over periods of time, people say, well, why? I say, well, I'm not an investor. I'm not selling you an investment. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? But when you look at history, why does the stock market do certain things kind of predictably over large periods of time? Well, it's because it's based on our system, and it's based on companies pursuing profit and recirculating that profit through its stockholders, which we all take part in by consuming, right? So your role personally, finance speaking, could be as an investor to take part in every time somebody purchases toilet paper or whatever. You're involved in that.
Right.
And if you're not involved in that, if you're only on the borrowing side, it is exactly the opposite direction. Their debt is the opposite of investing. So an understanding of our economic system, of our business system, is such an important part of connecting it to the personal finance end of it. Why do we make certain decisions? How can we make different decisions? I do believe education can help people, even young people, because the evidence is all around me. When I visit schools, I'm sensing a big change in the current middle and high school and college students. They are really interested in this kind of stuff. There was a period of time where I felt, oh boy, I can't wake up. They're really interested in it, and that's cool.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to say, here's your credit card and your monthly payment's going to be this, and just do what you want. But, the borrower is slave to the lender, and we have a situation in this country in which many people are indentured servants to a payment, right? And you talked about this not having flexibility and latitude, but that builds into what I kind of want to talk about next, because you wrote a blog post, and in your recent blog post, you said, meeting the home affordability challenge, part 1, you take a step back and analyze the affordability issue through a financial and economic lens. So I'm wondering what led you to write this particular piece at this moment, and was it something happening in Maine, or is this a broader national conversation, really?
I'm sure there are many communities having the same conversation. I've been in Maine since 2003, minus 7 years in Spain, where I still spent the summers here. So Maine's been home for a long time. So I'm mostly connected with that. And I have seen what's happened in the market here, especially in the last 5, 6, 8 years. But there's certainly places in the country that are going through the same thing. And I saw it happen in Connecticut where I grew up. I saw very similar type of dynamics take place. I always have ideas for posts. There's a long, long list. I'm just doing it once a month. And this one, I just think some things came together where I happened to hear a radio program talking about, just the supply of housing, critical problem, some political stuff circulating, and then some young people I know who bought houses. And how did you manage that? And there weren't any magic bank accounts coming from parents in this case. I knew that.
Okay.
And, the things that they said were just old school, right? And
how do you mean?
Basics, old school. In part 2 of this, I'm going to give some of the tips, but I'll definitely share right now too. But things like, I stayed at my parents' house longer. I put up with that roommate for 6 months more than I wanted to, but that allowed me to save an extra $3,000. We didn't go out to restaurants anymore. In one case it was a couple. So my partner and I agreed, if we changed certain behaviors, we realized over X number of years how much money we could save towards a down payment. We drove an old car. None
made
of them
sacrifices.
None of them brought out, well, I made a bunch of money in crypto. None of them brought out. It was all, and even though the numbers are staggeringly against, when you look at just wages and income, yes, but that's not the whole puzzle. There's lots of pieces. Maybe, as I said in the post, for right now, buying a home in Maine and in many communities in the United States, you're going to have, this generation, people now will have to make harder choices about some things in their life than maybe I did or my parents did. But as I also mentioned in either part 1 or part 2, even though the ratio was more favorable a couple of generations ago, my parents' mortgage was 14%.
Yeah.
So if you run that out, the hill they had to climb was also very steep.
Right.
And we drove old cars and took vacations in a station wagon. And so it's hard. Income it can be really tricky. This connects to education as well because of career advancement and looking for a better income as you continue to become more valuable, whether it's through experience, whether it's as a tradesperson, or whether it's the college route. Increasing your experience and your value, you can increase your earnings over time. That plays into the equation as well. But there are proven ways to methodically save more money and combat this house increase. And as I mentioned, you can either look at the invisible hand of capitalism changing the prices or the slower hand of government. I don't really see either one really changing the landscape in any time soon.
Right.
So I wanted to say, what can individuals do step by step with the warning? It's going to take time and hard choices.
Yeah.
And that's where the best thing I can do is help people understand what those can be and hopefully help them reflect, back to our behavioral thing, hopefully reflect on their behavior and say, oh, these are some changes I can make for my future self.
So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, make sure I'm following the right way, that when we peel back this onion, if you will, a lot of the pressure that exists around affordability, if you will, is more one of choices that people need to make to maybe sacrifice and say, I would love to have a 2,000 square foot home, but the average size home in America in 1955 was 950 square feet.
Yeah.
And the average family size, I think, was like 4 to 5, and now it's like 2.3 or something.
Yeah.
So we have less people wanting more space for all their crap made in China that they bought with a credit card so that they can store it up in all these nooks and crannies.
It all plays into it. There are economic I've been researching this now for several months here and there. I'm not an expert on it, but a few things caught my eye related to this. One, from census data, 2023 census data. This whole thing about there's not enough housing in Maine, the supply is so low. And I keep thinking, the population of Maine didn't grow that much.
Right.
So what happened to the housing supply? And one of the statistics that jumped out to me is people per unit.
Yeah.
In 1974, it was, I'm trying to go by memory, 2.3 something people per unit, and now it's 1.7.
Yeah.
You can't have that and not have higher prices.
Right.
Now, and someone said, well, the higher prices came first. History doesn't say that. So the statistics suggest it was the other way around. More homes are being built for vacation purposes. They're bigger. Everything you said. So it's a combination of factors, but the difference between income and cost is real, and it's hard. So again, I come back to what can you do? Will economics change and put pressure on housing prices to at least level off? Maybe. It happened, like where I grew up in Connecticut, a place where 20 years ago I realized I couldn't live because housing prices were so outrageous. In the last 20 years, Maine has outpaced that area incredibly in terms of percentage of growth. So markets do tend to kind of stabilize, so Maine may go through that at some point. But for folks who don't want to wait, they can take steps to say, okay, maybe I can't do this in 3 years. Maybe to save for a down payment is going to take me 6. Whatever their formula is, it's probably changed. So these are ways folks can react to the economics. Understanding the economics is helpful because that can give, that can inform the decision, hey, I may have to move. Americans, we do tend to move. We move for work and we move for housing.
This is an interesting point, though, because in Maine, I'm wondering if Mainers really move. We have an aging population.
Yeah.
And many of these people have lived in the same house for decades.
Yeah.
All their relationships are in that community, their doctors, their friends, their family.
Right.
They're like, I'm going to come out of this place in a pine box.
Older, yes, and generationally speaking, and with our aging population, this is another factor on housing prices.
Yeah.
Because a lot of units that under different demographics would be on the market because of people dying are not going on the market because the baby boomers are going to be in those homes for a long time. And those homes are not on the market, and they're typically 1 or 2 people in the unit. So again, a pressure in Maine, and we do need more younger people. So moving could be within Maine, right? It doesn't, and I certainly don't want people to leave Maine, and they can look in other places in the country, and it's maybe not that much of a better picture.
Right.
So the combination of work, salary, cost of living, quality of life to housing is part of that as well. And maybe someone has the ability to work from home, and that could change the equation for them. But everything needs to be on the table and taken as a whole. And then in the second post, I do some real back of the envelope math and say, here's a few decisions, and here's what they could add up to after 3 years. And I find, as I was the same way once upon a time, I didn't look at numbers in those terms. I looked at today. And then when someone showed me, over 5 years, if you looked at these little decisions, I'm like, oh my goodness, that really makes a difference. So that's something to hopefully enlighten and educate on.
Yeah, before we recorded this with you today, now doing this, we were recording about is it smarter to rent or buy? And there's this website, NerdWallet, maybe you're familiar with it. They have a tool on there, and we plugged in some general things like paying rent $2,000 a month with a 1-month security deposit versus buying a $400,000 house at 6%. Now, the assumption in the calculator is that the person who's paying the $2,000 a month rent will also be putting money aside into an investment vehicle that appreciates over time, hopefully, all things considered equal historically. So in this analysis, in that case for an individual filer, they would be better off renting financially than buying if they were putting 1% a year for repairs and maintenance in the home and taxes, all these other things that go along with home ownership. So I think, and I'm speaking as a real estate agent now that believes very much in real estate ownership as a way to build wealth. Mm-hmm. But the reason why it's proven to be a good wealth builder, besides general appreciation of somewhere around 6 to 7% for real estate, is that it forces savings. Like every month when you pay your mortgage payment, a certain amount is going toward principal. Yes, it's disgusting how much is going toward interest. We prefer not to look at that line, but it was what enabled you to buy the home. This is the way, the system we have. And every month when you make your $1,500 a month mortgage payment, at first it's probably like $150, and then in time it's the full $1,500 until it's zero.
Yeah.
And now you've been forced every month incrementally to save toward your future.
Yes.
As long as we don't have like an '08 meltdown crisis, which, getting back to what you said earlier, is super unlikely because we're just not building the inventory.
Yeah, and those things are not permanent. You know,
Right.
understanding history, understanding economics, buy land, they're not making any more of it, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yes, housing has proven it's overwhelming to be a store of value, mm-hmm. And an investment, and at the very least a store of value, and typically an investment. Every market in the country, and is, anything short of a zombie land, mm-hmm. That's most likely to continue, mm-hmm. and that's the best you can go on, is what's most likely to happen within our system. Understand that, and yes, paying that mortgage systemizes this. Pay yourself, really, in a way. I just refinanced my mortgage. It was really kind of a close decision to refinance and get the lower rate, or just pay extra on my mortgage. Mm-hmm. But this really institutionalized it, mm-hmm. by refinancing. I have to pay a little bit more a month now, mm-hmm. that I might have chosen to, what am I going to do with that money? And it could be the same in the rent versus own decision. The calculators can be interesting. I caution people on calculators if they're not using them on top of a foundation of knowledge of, like, for yourself, an agent who knows many more things about buying a home. Go into it. It's not just, am I wasting my money on rent? There's so much more that goes into it. So that analysis has to be comprehensive. And one of the things that I'll mention in the blog is that folks often don't pay attention to those other things when, mm-hmm. it comes to buying a home that you need to be prepared for, and that can help inform, like, is now the time, or should I have a little bit more down payment or emergency fund, to be ready to be a homeowner. But ultimately, yeah, it's a way. It's an appreciating asset. It's something that goes up in value, and if we have to borrow, that's the kind of thing we're better off borrowing for, mm-hmm. is something that's most likely going to go up.
So if you're talking to one of your, we'll call them students, I guess, mm-hmm. but you're sometimes meeting with adults that aren't in a traditional education environment anymore, but they're learning from you. And so if you were talking with somebody about buying a home today, what are some of kind of the key insights you think they should understand about market pressures?
Wow, that's a great question, because it's very complicated and complex. About market pressures, I think, not that everyone has to become an economist, but I think it's helpful to understand supply and demand, the reason why prices are where they are in Maine. There's several reasons, and no one knows exactly, but there are several contributing factors. We mentioned a couple. There's rental units now. There's lifestyle choice. There's many, many reasons. There was COVID-related shocks to mm-hmm. the market, where the influx of buyers who don't necessarily live in Maine, mm-hmm. but they bought in Maine for lifestyle choice. Lots of reasons why. But I think that can help inform people now who might be looking toward political solutions or moves and waiting for that, to understand the economic forces are stronger, mm-hmm. and that one path is to consider is, what can I do? Mm-hmm. I can make certain choices to save for a down payment, and get myself in the position to take part in the market, kind of like taking part in the stock market, taking part in the home ownership, the real estate market, in something that's a proven store of value. If that's value-wise, other value, not dollar value-wise, suits somebody. The painting the fence and doing that kind of stuff and being a homeowner. If all of those other values as well go along with the financial part, maybe you want to be a homeowner.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, because oftentimes people will be asked a question, like, what does success look like for you? And a lot of times people respond with something like, I'm going to own my own home. But they don't necessarily stop to think about the lifestyle that's required when you own your own home. Like, okay, the roof is leaking. You're not calling the landlord to fix it. It's you. You're the landlord.
Yeah.
The flip side to that is when the home goes up in value this year, that's your money, not the landlord's. So it's these trade-offs, right? And I do think there is a generational shift more toward life experiences per se, particularly with the consumerism just continuing to churn away, and so we have a lot of people who would rather not have their pride come from the home, saying they own the home. Sure. It's more like, I've been to these different places, or I've done these different things.
That's a choice. It's a choice, and that can be a good one. I mean, the whole lifestyle versus own. I've heard some really sharp financial gurus, if you will. Some really believe in home ownership. Some say no, it's better to rent. But there's just so much more to it. Like if someone is a high earner and is able to do a lot of investing, and they're really only sort of negative is that they're wasting money on rent, quote unquote, but they're earning so much, that's not going to be the store value in a home, maybe not important to them. But for the average earner in the United States, over the long term, it's something to consider. And can I mention another realtor?
Yeah,
just because I, as part of my research, I talked to my realtor, who's a former student, by the way,
cool.
Hannah Feingold. She was one of my students, and I knew back then she was pretty sharp. Well, she's ended up, and she was my current realtor. And I just said, what are you seeing? And what are some of the things that you hear or can advise and caution? And she said, one of the big things is not understanding all the aspects of home ownership. And she said, as much as I'm for it as a real estate agent, I want to make sure that folks know and think about, especially new buyers, younger buyers, all these other things that go into it. And in some cases, that might mean waiting a little while rather than getting out too much on the thin ice.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about housing here, but of course, financial literacy and financial education is much broader than that. So you talk a lot about, in that post as well, about what individuals can do to prepare financially, like from budgeting and debt management to saving for the down payments. What kind of actionable steps could someone listening take? Maybe more broadly, whoever's listening, and then maybe we could go a deeper dive if someone were trying to prepare to buy real estate.
Yeah, a few things that you'll see in the second post that come to mind, where I try to put a dollar figure onto some concrete steps that everyone can look at. One might be cutting X expenses by taking these steps. I always pick on streaming services because it's easy. The average American is up to $6.
Wow.
$90 a month.
Yeah.
Right. And and the real funny thing is how many we don't know about, because we forget.
Yeah.
So we're not even really using them. So, well, if I could cut a few of those and not go out to eat one time and take that $100 a month for 3 years, that's $4,000 towards my down payment.
Right.
Then, if I could put up with these roommates a little bit longer, or add a roommate to my living situation, or be with my folks or family a little longer, and just cut my living expenses by $300 a month, that's $11,000 over 3 years toward my down payment. And the side gig, right? We're in a side gig economy. I have a friend who recently was telling me a story about how he took this little part-time job at a gym, and he gets to work out for free, which was his motivation, and socially. And he said, and I get paid, it's around minimum wage. He said, I work 5 hours a week. And after a few months, I realized I had enough that if I did this for a couple of years, I could pay off my mortgage just by giving 5 hours a week to himself.
Sure.
By a little side gig. So it's mostly on the expense side.
I appreciate what you just said there. I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah.
He gave 5 hours to himself, because I think oftentimes we're like, hey, I'm giving this time to my employer. But if you're going into it with the mindset of this is a means to an end,
Absolutely.
Right? I'm using this just like they're using me and my time. Like I'm using this to get ahead with what I need to.
And there's so much more part-time giggery opportunity in our economy nowadays, whether it's an Uber or delivery or working at a gym a few hours. The labor market numbers are weird. Places still don't have enough help, and they're always looking to fill in those gaps at relatively low wage, but those numbers really can add up.
Right.
And if
Steve, this is kind of inconvenient. You're encouraging people to be sensible with their money and work harder.
I really am. I admit it. Very guilty.
That's okay.
And the more
there's another bald guy with glasses named Dave Ramsey that says the same thing, and
we're both from Tennessee.
Oh, you are? Okay.
So I'll often say that us guys from Dave Ramsey was a big influence on helping me change my direction.
Same for us personally.
A big one. I mean, he's the man in that area for me. I don't agree with everything he says, like credit cards and things like that.
Sure.
We have some different views, but the core of it, yes, Dave Ramsey and many others that formed, and then my own experience that formed where I stand today. And then talking to young people, like I quoted Jaden in my blog post, who's just out of college, and I mean, she sounds more old school than I do, but she uses language that is more connected with her own generation.
Well,
but
I think
ultimately,
sadly a whole generation of people like Jaden have seen the promises not come to fruition, right?
Yes.
And so now they're like learning on the backs of a generation of people for whom it was the first group of people to get a credit card like you did right after high school, basically going into college. And so did I, and then spent quite a bit of time in my mid-20s trying to unwind that. Feel super blessed that I learned about it and was aware of it then, mostly because I had a best friend that was a financial advisor that was like, this is dumb. And when you hear it from your friend enough times, you're like, this is probably dumb.
Yeah.
But so much of it based on human behavior and all. And so it's one thing, having the education, the other thing, living it out and deciding to stay that extra few months with the roommate or doing the side gig or whatever. Ultimately, that's on each individual.
Hard to do, but I think the more, like you heard it enough times from your friend, you eventually said, maybe he's onto something. I think the more we can send those messages about the hard choices on the menu and the results that can come from it, connecting it to a result, not just saying, well, this is good for you. Well, put some numbers on it. Sometimes that may not help everyone, but it certainly helps someone like me, and I do try to use that to say, for example, what would the 3-year impact be of these decisions?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that because I feel like oftentimes if everybody had a notice on their phone, like, okay, you go to the register, now there's no cash anymore. It's all touch pay, card, whatever. We don't even put money in our hands, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
So like if at the end of that transaction you tap your phone and it says, hey, great, your stick of gum is paid for. By the way, if you had put this in this thing over here, that stick of gum is worth $27. My wife, it drives her nuts all the time because we'll buy something for our son. He's 18 months old, and I'm kind of like, want to get him what he needs. But on the other hand, I'm like, does he really need that? Because that jacket that was $50 is actually would have been $700 towards his graduation, nut for college. So it's like, if you had something that just prompted you with like what your decision cost you a year from now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now. Granted, this is, making assumptions. All these math things are. Like, if you had put this stick of gum in this market, in this return, then you would have got that. And
I used to pick on the cup of coffee, and I still do sometimes, but it was just a nice way to bring this to life. And I would have students using some online calculators, those who were afraid of the math, they didn't have to worry. And I'd say, all right, here's what I taught you about credit cards and how credit card interest works. And if you pay part of it off, and included in that bunch of stuff that you needed was a cup of coffee, a $5 latte or something, what do you think that thing would end up costing you after 5 years? And then let them go, experiential learning. And no one gets the exact right answer because there's a lot of variables. But the bottom line is they were like, wow, to see if
what is it, like $30 or something like that?
It could be as much as hundreds, because that last purchase, if you don't pay the whole thing off, it
Compounds.
doesn't discriminate. It's compounding. It's all part of the rest of it. So and that was really more eye-opening than just saying compound interest working against you. Take a purchase that you could easily get into that mess, like I did when I was in my 20s. And then when a few necessary things came along, like brakes on my car, suddenly my Eddie Bauer purchases were tied to the brakes on my car for the years I couldn't pay them off. And that T-shirt ended up probably costing me $100, right? Which is, and then you take that micro decision and expand it to the big decisions in our life. And I mentioned cars in the second part. I mentioned cars a lot, or there's a big mention of a car, because the place, especially young people, but all people, are most likely to trip up is the next most expensive thing in our life. And for Americans, that's usually a car. And I tripped up several times on the car.
I'm curious on this, though. What about, we haven't talked about it, and I think it's a big factor, but I could be wrong, student loan debt.
Yeah, student loan debt is, boy, what a monster. After having lived abroad and everything else, I just continually am blown away by the complications of our system and how what a mess it really is.
You mean in the U.S.?
Yeah, in the U.S.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah.
Our education's great, right? There's a trade-off. My experience tells me that as well.
Sure.
And that's why people come to American universities and so on. And the work we do at FAME, both to try to help people with financial aid, scholarships, and then help them with repayment, is because it's such a big deal. And right now the numbers are pretty staggering as to what's going on in the student loan world. But in terms of personal finance, where I am on student loan debt is learn what's happening right now with your loans. Don't hide. This is the biggest mistake people can make. It's kind of like not filing your taxes is much worse than not paying them. If you file but don't pay, I was reading something in Kiplinger's last month, it's like a $10 a month penalty on $1,000. If you don't file, it's hundreds of dollars per month penalties and possible jail time, right? It's kind of like that with student loans. If you can't pay or don't pay, but you file, in other words, you contact your servicer and you say, this is my situation, what's the best plan for me, this is what I can afford, you're much better off than thinking it's going to go away, because it's not going to go away. Politically, they're not going to go away, and legally, they're not going to go away. Student loans are almost impossible to bankrupt. Easily you have your wages attached. So the best thing to do is be proactive on your student loans, find the best payment plan for you, contact FAME if you need help. We offer free counseling. And in many cases, some folks can find their payment is more manageable than they thought because of the programs, including the new programs that are available. And some folks may be pursuing loan forgiveness through either their work or through time. And then,
or from the state of Maine, because with the student loan repayment credit, now we're giving people up to $2,500 a year.
Student loan repayment credits,
which is something that, like, I worked on that for 4 years in the legislature. FAME was a great partner in that work. Bill Norbert, the legislative liaison for FAME, and I collaborated a lot on that. And before we had the Maine Opportunity Tax Credit, which wasn't much of an opportunity for many people because they didn't understand how to navigate it. It was super complicated. And needless to say, for sake of this discussion, we simplified it to basically say, look, you graduated after 2007, you get $2,500 a year. Now, this came home to roost for us personally, my wife and I, where this year we went to this thing, and this never happens, but she won a decent amount of money at this event. It was like $10,000.
Wow.
Okay, it was great. Hey, our one time winning the lottery, right? So I was like, well, what are you going to do with it? And she's like, well, we'll use it to pay off student loans. I'm like, great. So she puts a big chunk toward it, and then I was like, that was a mistake, because if we just leave it on the trajectory and she makes the payment, we get the tax credit back every year, then the state is kind of paying it down to zero. Here's a micro example of a financial literacy decision, right? Which is, hey, have the money. I know the smart thing to do is eliminate as much debt as possible. What debt do we have? Our house and student loans, that's it. So I'm going to put it towards student loans. But I was like, after she did, I'm like, great, at least that's off the table, that amount of it. But I'm like, we could have taken that 10 grand, put it into, a dividend paying stock and turned it into maybe 11 or 12. A lot of it is always sometimes you get to the point where you're trying to maximize it, which is a blessing to be in that situation. That's totally not lost on me. A lot of this conversation is, what do people do with the excess, right?
Yeah.
But not as much about what about when you're trying to get two things to come together.
Right.
But that's a great example of, with education, somebody who maybe thinks, I can't afford because I have my student loans. If they're exposed to this program, start taking advantage of it, voila, they've got $2,500 a year that they can apply towards buying a home or whatever.
I just talked to a recent grad who's now working full-time in a nonprofit. Doesn't make very much and probably will not make very much, but is doing what she wants to do. And we got to talking about student loans, and I said, in your case, you're probably looking at loan forgiveness if you stay on this path. So you're going to want to make sure you have really good record keeping, and be on the program, the best payment program for you now, based on your income. So contact your servicer, contact us. We can help you find out what that is. And I said, and there's the Maine Opportunity tax credit. And she had no idea. And at the end, she said, this is a game changer. I said, yes, it is.
What I'm trying to do now is get lenders to basically take it in on their loan approval to be like, if somebody has $2,500 a month of student loans in Maine and they're working, they actually don't have that obligation because the state's got a contract to pay it, as long as they're paying their student loans.
As long as they're paying
so they may say, well, there's still the cash event that has to happen each month. They got to make their payment. But yes, in April, they're getting the money back. So anyway, I think there's ways for us to use these resources to help get people across the finish line as it relates to qualifying. But stepping back, though, focusing on financial capability, what are some foundational money habits or principles that you think would make the biggest difference? If someone listening to this were like, that's great, I'm not going to buy a home, but I'm interested in learning, what can I implement in my life that will make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the foundations are use a budget.
Yeah.
Whether it's a piece of paper or a spreadsheet that I taught you in 10th grade that you still use 20 years later, thanks to my students who tell me that. There's several online simple monthly tools. There are apps. I caution about apps that charge or that take your data. I'm a little cautious about them, but they do exist. Banks and credit unions many of them offer really good budgeting tools for their customers.
I wonder what percentage of Americans actually have a budget.
The data varies because people are not willing to say it, but the Federal Reserve data I've seen is something like 40%.
Really?
But that doesn't mean they have one, but to
that
follow.
Actually feels high to me. I thought you were going to be like,
very
it's
high
20%
to me.
or
Feels
something.
very. I've also seen numbers from not the Federal Reserve, something like 1 in 8, but I don't know if that distinguishes between who follows it versus who just says they have one.
Sure.
This is one of the things I'm seeing with apps and why I caution, be careful the app you choose. Make sure it's truly free. Make sure it's not stealing your data and isn't kind of fooling you, with a lot of cool stuff and this and that. And at the end, you're not following your spending limit. You're not spending less than you make. So to be on a budget, truly commit to a budget is one of the absolute foundations. That connects to an emergency fund. I really can't think of a better tandem for personal financial capability and success in the long run than being on a budget and building an emergency fund. Because the lack of an emergency fund triggers a waterfall of bad things. The lack of an emergency fund has someone go to a credit card for a $400 expense, and then another $400 expense, and then perhaps a loan against their wages or a payday loan or some other predatory type of situation or one card to pay another, it is a really bad snowball. So having an emergency fund in place, and I tell people, be wherever you are. You might not be in a position to build 6 months. Okay, let's build a few hundred and avoid that next small little thing that you're going to use that 21% credit card. The sense of accomplishment that I see people have when they're able to do that little thing is tremendous. And then the next thing, get it to $1,000 and then get it up to 3 months. In the meantime, maybe you're not putting money in that 401k right now. You can't, as I'm learning with age, that I can't out-exercise my diet.
Sure.
You can't out-earn your debt.
Yeah.
And that's been around a long time, but now social media is really trying to convince people there's a lot of ways to out-earn your debt. You can't out-earn your debt. Legal interest rates can be 24%, 27% legally. Then the stuff that kind of gets around it, like payday lending, we don't charge interest, but the effective interest rate can be hundreds of percent. You can't out-earn that in the stock market, crypto, gold, anything. So the emergency fund connected to a budget and start to build the sense of accomplishment and savings, and do this through habits. That's like part 3, right? Pay yourself first monthly instead of paying that streaming service automatically coming out of your bank account. Well, set up a direct deposit from your bank account into another bank account, into something that saves money.
It's interesting you mention this because I'm on a board of corporators for a local bank, and the CEO was presenting to the corporators for the annual meeting, and he was like, okay, stick with me here. I'm going to do a little tutorial on cryptocurrency. And people were like, how do we do a little? But it was good. I think he framed it the right way. Essentially just showing how we're moving more and more away from like touching money, right? And it's intangible. We have direct payment into your bank account for your wage check. Then all of the things get sucked out, and then you log in, and you're like, I just get paid $1,700, and there's $353 in there. Why? Maybe you're analyzing, maybe not. But there's not this visceral connection of sitting down, writing a check, being like, I've written this check out the last 3 months in a row to Netflix, and I don't remember the last time I watched Netflix,
Absolutely.
so I'm not going to write this check to Netflix this month.
Companies, and again, I don't fault them. I'm basically a capitalist. This is their job. Their job is to take your money. Your job's to protect it, right? They are counting on the fact that we set it and forget it for spending. Their model, I did some research on this for something at Fame internally, very informal research on streaming services and everything, and other subscription services. When you buy a printer, have you bought a printer recently? All they're going to try to do is hook you into a subscription for ink. Some printers won't even work if you don't get the subscription for ink. And that might be good for somebody who uses a lot of ink, but we're not going to. So I had to go through all these things to find a printer that didn't require me to. They're counting on that automatic $4.99 a month. Netflix has shown the way, right? Netflix showed everybody this was possible.
The irony with Netflix, when you look back, is they were giving consumers exactly what they wanted.
Exactly.
Blockbuster was slamming people with late fees. Nobody liked to have to wait for the new movie that came out for like 2 or 3 weeks. So we've delivered to people what they want, which is why Netflix has turned into what it is. But the mechanism by which we collect those resources now are feel so phantom that people are not having that interaction with it frequently enough to say, is this still right for me or not?
Yeah, that's so true. But they, in a good way for the industry and for capitalism, they showed, hey, monthly subscription, right? In the old days, it was magazines. Now it's this, and now with automatic, people aren't writing that check. It's automatically coming out until they stop it. And some of them, it can be tough to stop, even though there are some laws in place, and I think more are coming to make it easier so that it's just as easy to cancel as it is to subscribe. It's a way that money, I call it leaks. I did a webinar in the fall called, Oh No, My Budget is Leaking. And how is it leaking? Like, and this is one of the big ways our budgets leak. And if $6.99 a month can leak out, $8.99, $12.99, $17.99, $1,200 a year can leak out,
Right.
and more, and even more leaks out when we talk about car payments and the effect on insurance and taxes and things that we don't think about. So, trying to take those small examples through budgeting, emergency funds, and habits to instead siphon some of that money into something for your future are really important foundations. It all fits into the
funny you
education
mention that
piece.
because sometimes some people might listen to this and laugh, but I often feel broke, but it's by design, because I have learned the principles of investing. And so a lot of times I'm putting resources into something that I could just be like buying other stuff. But to me, it's like someone asked me this recently. They're like, how come, you're doing this? And I'm like, because I don't want to be working forever, and I've seen it, with my own parents, by the time you get into like your 60s, and that's when it really starts. And I'm already starting to see it among some people, and even my age, that just some people got started younger and some people didn't. And it doesn't make the people that didn't bad people. It's just whatever they had to for access to information or whatever, they made a different decision.
Yeah, it's
really coming to roost. Like 20 years after you graduate from high school, you're looking around, you're like, who were the people? It was just serendipity that I got involved in real estate. Dumb luck, I guess, call it. Just like you said, crossing the right paths, having the right person chirping in your ear. Totally a blessing,
Yeah.
But I don't think that it should just be that abundance is based on happenstance, It's, hey, how do we integrate this in what people learn? And how do you have people understanding that they too can benefit from this system if they instead look at it as, how do I benefit from the system, not the system's against me? Because it can feel hopeless.
Absolutely. And feeling, I said it in the blog post because Jaden said it, people can feel like it's unachievable, and feeling like it is very powerful. To them, that's real.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of data and a lot of stuff around us that support it, right? If that's your bias, if you're thinking this is against me, I totally get it. And I'm trying to be on the other side of that equation, fighting back to say, here's what you can do for yourself. I mean, I'll be working, I'll be working longer than my 20-something person self would have thought necessary, right? And that's okay. I love what I do, and I'm fortunate that that's come that way. But if I was in my 20s and someone could have shown me a path to maybe when I hit 60 to say, well, yeah, you might still work, but it would be your choice.
Right.
You could do this, you could do that. Maybe you could own a piece of property that you rented. You could do this, you could own a business. You'd have a menu of choices that would be very different than the one you have now. Based on financial stuff.
I wonder if instead of telling people that the latte that was $5 might cost them $100, we instead figure out how to like tokenize or give value to the one thing that we all really want, which is freedom.
Yeah.
Like, hey, by not buying that coffee, you just earned 17 freedom points, because those are calculated based on like how much true freedom you'll have with your time with this amount of money in the bank down the road. Yeah,
money, or whether it's money or career choice. Like for me, when I knew I had to change things, it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that I hated my job, my work.
Yeah.
Yet I made good money for my age, and I dug this hole. My kids always say, "What about those people in Cape Elizabeth and this and that?" I'm like, well, keep in mind, more income, more money is often just a bigger shovel. And their hole might be much deeper than yours might be.
More
mine
money,
might
more
be.
problems. I think that's what Notorious B.I.G. said.
That's right. So for me, it was not just the financial part. It was how the finances and the life choice connected. Yeah. I wanted to get into education, and I knew my salary was going to be less.
Right.
And I knew I was going to have to interrupt my income. I joined the Peace Corps for a while. And to do that, I was going to have to go without money for a while.
Yeah.
And so that pain pleasure switched.
Right.
And I said that changed my behavior. So for everyone, is it the point system?
Yeah, because it's not all about making more money. It's like you could be extremely wealthy with 40 or 50,000 a year, depending on what your lifestyle choices are and how you value those things.
If I knew and had enacted a fraction of what I know now back in those days, if wealth was what I had wanted to build, I could have built a lot more wealth. If time is what I had wanted, one of my blog posts is about time. And because when I lived in Spain, because of good financial decisions the several years before, I was able to move to Spain because my wife's job took us there and work part-time for 7 years and walk my kid to school every day.
That's awesome.
And be a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
That was because of financial decisions I made before that.
Yeah.
And those 7 years, I didn't work much. That cost me a lot.
Sure.
Not even a conversation as to whether it was worth it.
Right.
So it's not just about the money. That's obviously in our society. It's important. Everything costs money. Health insurance is a big deal. Everything's a big deal, right? But back to when we started today, our system, understanding it, navigating our system is really tough. But knowing it, being educated about it, the economics, the personal finance, the psychological pieces, being able to hear people like me or you say, yeah, I made that mistake, and it's okay. We're not perfect. And then trying to get into our schools to get the kids the chance to have more formal education is really helpful, because when they're 18, we're going to be asking them to make some pretty big decisions having to do with money.
Yeah, and if you sit down with your average middle school class of 7th graders and you're like 30 of them in the class, hey, raise your hand. How many of you in this room think you're going to be a millionaire? Usually it's like 1 or 2 hands, maybe.
Yeah.
But then if you give them a quick lesson on, hey, if you put this $1,000 in this, here's what it looks like, when you're 62, then you show them like 1,000 isn't going to make it to $1 million, but they see the point of like compound interest.
Yeah.
And it's like that I learned like when I was 18 years old about how, there's like a frog in this thing of milk and it's going to die, but it starts churning its legs and it starts making butter, and eventually there's enough butter it can hop out, right?
Yeah.
And that really, I think a lot of times then when they see, oh, wait a second, that 1,000 can grow into this, then I can be a millionaire. And like all their hands go up,
It's so in middle schoolers, we do an exercise called Claim Your Future, which is a career budgeting exercise. And with middle schoolers, they get a job and an income, and they have to spend the money for a month on paper, right? And they have to make a housing decision, a transportation decision, and so on. And I was at a middle school last year, and these kids, the first question was, Steve, is it okay in this exercise if I live with him? We're going to be roommates and share housing costs. I said, yeah, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
That's what people have to make that decision. So of course you can, because he said his income's pretty high and mine's pretty low. I said, great, as long as you guys can get along and share costs. That's a great way to make your money last longer. Down later, I see he picked one of the more expensive transportation choices. And I said, on your pay? I said, oh, that's a tough one. He's like, that's why I'm living with him. And
Such a great example,
I said, that's great.
Yeah.
I said, this is what this is about.
Connecting
You're understanding the impact of one decision on another.
Yeah.
Right? And the potential for that type of thinking. So this is where financial education, economic education, it's not just the nuts and bolts, which we can look up online. It's trying to have discussions about a way of thinking about decisions and money and navigating, again, a tough system.
Yeah.
But people are doing it.
Yeah.
So like, Dave Ramsey would say, I studied millionaires. I don't study millionaires. I study regular folks who maybe will become millionaires.
Right.
And what does it come down to? And it's just so, well, it never happens that I meet somebody who got their monies through the lottery or something.
Right.
It's always through the tried and true things. It's boring, but you know what? It works.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as you look ahead, whether that's future writing or data or market conditions, what questions are you most interested in exploring next? And I guess what gives you hope about Maine's ability to navigate challenges in the future?
With housing specifically or
I think just more in general around financial issues.
What really inspires me, other than just the work I do and the people I work with, that there are organizations like that are like FAME, and the others I encounter who are so driven. I went to a workshop this week to look at ALICE workers, people who are working and can't pay their bills despite work, with the United Way, and all these companies exploring ways to help their employees to become more financially, well, and programs that they can do, which don't really necessarily cost a lot. A lot of times it's just trying to show that you care and everything. So the work I see being done in Maine, compared to any place I've ever lived, and I've lived in several states and a few countries, the percentage of people involved here doing this kind of work seems really high to me. We have that. When I visit schools, in the last few years, there's a change. You alluded to before about a previous generation kind of really felt kind of defeated and beat up after 2008, and they kind of had and I experienced this as a classroom teacher, a period of time where they just seemed resolved to things are not going to be better for them, right? And it's the fault of the older people and all this kind of stuff. And now in these last year, 2 years, when I visit middle school, high school, and I engage with these students, and they want to know. It's like they really want to know about, how do I get a better credit score, and why do I want one? Questions I never heard when I was teaching this full time in the classroom. Tell me more about compound interest. How does that work? Oh, credit cards. I'm not sure if I want to get a credit card, but if I had, I can just tell there's a shift right now, generationally, in the attitude of learning about this stuff, because maybe it's not rigged. Maybe it is on me. Maybe I can do something to help myself and those around me. That gives me a lot of hope. And I teach the class at Maine College of Art and Design in the fall, with college students, and with a variety of situations, and they want to be independent artists. Pretty tough gig, right?
Yeah.
And some have student loans, but at the end of the day, the questions and the emotions they poured into talking about money and how to get better, that tells me something's brewing, and I hope that all of us are part of that, and the efforts to raise that, raise that tide and raise all the boats is what's going on. And that's what gives me just a lot of optimism. The people that I encounter.
That's exciting. Well, Steve, thanks for joining us on Housing Matters, and this conversation has been wonderful. Of course, we touched on a lot more than just housing, but a lot of these pieces come together to form the headlines that we see in the news every single day about what's going on. And I'm really encouraged to hear that you're out there on the front lines every day, working to help educate people on the system that we live in and how that they can benefit from it for themselves and their family.
Thank you. It's wonderful to do this as part of my work, and to let people know that there are paths to education, paths to financial wellness, and there are folks out there like me and like FAME who are here to help out.
And before we wrap up, if folks are interested in following your blog, where would they find that?
Yes, if they go to FAME's homepage, which is famemaine.com, right there on the top of the screen is the click for the blog.
Cool.
And I also do audio.
Okay.
So some people like to listen to me, believe it or not, instead of read. I
know I found that shocking now with our 32nd episode, and people like to listen to us, but it's good if we get the word out.
Yep. around the end of every month is when a post comes out. And that's where they can go, right to FAME's website, and it's right there on the front page.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.